Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this very special occasion. We're very honored to have Dr. Temple Grandin with us here this evening. And also, we have some excellent student leaders from the Neurodiversity Alliance who are here as well. I'll let them introduce themselves here in just a moment. But first, I just wanted to talk about the Neurodiversity Alliance and what we do as an organization, and talking about all the great things we hope to accomplish with our student leaders. So it includes anyone that you might be able to connect us with, and there's students in the audience right now. We're super happy that you're here to join us, and hopefully the things that you hear this evening will really inspire you to want to create your own club.
Yeah.
So with the Neurodiversity Alliance, what do we do? So essentially, we're a nonprofit organization founded by and for students who learn differently, and one of the largest online communities and national networks of neurodiversity clubs in the entire country.
Yeah.
So we're talking about high school students and college students alike. Through our online community and our app and online portal, these students can access the tools needed to launch their own clubs on campuses, along with a variety of scholarship, leadership opportunities, which we have some of our leaders here this evening, national events designed to build community, such as the event you're currently attending, and then developing those leadership skills, helping facilitate that peer-to-peer support, and raising awareness for the 1 in 5 of us who learn differently. So that's sort of the Neurodiversity Alliance in a nutshell, and we're happy to provide more information after our event here today, and it's sort of a follow-up email in the survey that we hope to send to you all. But without further ado, let's get rolling here. I'm going to have our students introduce themselves, and then we'll have Dr. Grandin speak to us. So, Julian, why don't you start out and
Yeah,
introduce?
and then open it up for just tons of questions.
Yes, and tons of questions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hello, my name is Julian Bouchard. I'm a senior in high school and I want to go into mechanical engineering when I go to college. I have autism and that's kind of like really defined my life a lot, even though I haven't really noticed it. So when I was a kid, like really, really young, I was like nonverbal, so I had to go to like speech therapies to kind of like learn how to speak, and like I don't really remember it well because I was like very little. I only remember like bits and pieces, but it was like a huge struggle to kind of like get to where I am now, where I'm an accomplished student. I'm kind of grateful for everyone that kind of helped supported me, and I kind of want to give back to, other people like me that need help and need that kind of guidance, I guess.
Thank you, Julian. Hi, everyone. My name is Allie. I'm a senior in college majoring in psychological science with a minor in linguistics at California State University, San Marcos. Being neurodivergent is a core part of my identity, influencing the way I perceive the world, learn, communicate, and think. And being a part of the Neurodiversity Alliance has been a wonderful part of my journey towards empowerment and self acceptance as a neurodivergent woman. Aside from being a student, I am a researcher in the Supporting Practices for Autism through Research and Community Collaboration Spark Lab, where I'm involved in researching topics such as the quality of life of autistic adolescents, sense of belonging among neurodivergent college students, and inclusive childhood education. Additionally, as a developmental paraprofessional, I am a provider of DIR floor time therapy, which is a play-based developmental approach for autistic children and adolescents. I am immensely honored to participate in this evening's event, and I'd like to express my gratitude to everyone for tuning in today. Now, please allow me to introduce Dr. Temple Grandin. Diagnosed with autism at a time when very little was understood about it, Dr. Grandin has defied expectations and shown the world what's possible when we embrace neurodiversity. As one of the most prominent voices in the neurodiversity paradigm, her life's work exemplifies resilience, creativity, and the power of thinking differently. Dr. Grandin has not only transformed how we understand autism, but also revolutionized the field of animal welfare, penning over 60 scientific research papers on animal behavior and fiercely advocating for humane livestock handling practices. A celebrated professor at Colorado State University, Dr. Grandin is the author of numerous books, including Thinking in Pictures and The Autistic Brain, which have inspired millions worldwide. Her work reminds us that different ways of thinking lead to extraordinary contributions. Dr. Grandin, we look forward to this evening's conversation, and I will now hand things off to you.
Okay, I think I'll just tell a little bit about myself. Currently, I am a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. In fact, I've been there now for 34 years. I was very lucky to get into a very good early intervention program because I was nonverbal till age 4. And the main things that they worked on teaching me was language, learning how to take turns at games, and skills. And there was no forced eye contact. I'm really glad that I was not subjected to that, and people are getting away from that. I'm a big proponent of developing strengths. I was good at art, so my mother always encouraged my ability in art. But I would just draw the same horse head over and over again. And she said, well, let's draw the whole horse. Take that thing the kids fixated on, expand it. Let's say it's cars. Read about them. Do mathematics with cars. Expand it. Very important. Another thing I like to talk about is the different ways that autistic people think. In fact, I've got a relatively new book, Visual Thinking, and I present the science behind different types of thinking, such as object visualization, that's me, mathematical pattern thinking, and word thinking. Now, a lot of people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking, but an autistic person tends to be an extreme mathematician, or maybe an extreme object visualizer. My memory works like little phone pictures. All my thoughts are pictures. And the kinds of jobs that someone like me can be good at, anything to do with skilled trades, fixing cars, anything to do with mechanical things, art, photography, and then, of course, working with animals. Now, one of the places where I'm really weak is algebra. I can't do abstract math. And I'm worried that that's going to hold a lot of object visualizers back. Then another kind of thinker is your mathematical pattern thinker. Music and math go together. And the approach to problem solving is different. They'll calculate something where I might just see a solution to a problem. I can give you a real simple example. There was a lady at the Denver airport that had lost her stroller. She had 2 little kids, and I just imagined her borrowing a blue Southwest Airlines wheelchair. You see, that's just seeing a solution. Now, these other wheelchairs they have at the airport, the kids would fall out of. It has to be a blue Southwest Airlines wheelchair. You see, that's just an example of seeing how to fix something. Then you have the word thinker. They love sports facts, or maybe facts on movies or some other thing, or history. And they think very much in words and facts. And all individuals on the spectrum think in details. And I do a lot of talks to business people on the different kinds of minds. And I make it very plain. We need these skills. I'm very concerned about skill loss. I'm hearing horror stories after horror story of little math kids not getting challenged with harder math and turning into terrible behavior problems. My kind of thinker needs to be doing all kinds of hands-on stuff. Too many kids today grow up never using a tool. You need us if you want the power plants to run, factories to run. Also, my kind of mind invents a lot of mechanical stuff. When I was out in construction, and I was in construction for 25 years, people built equipment for me. I worked with big shops that were owned by neurodivergent autistic people that were undiagnosed. Also, sensory issues. Give you some pointers on that. Oftentimes, that loud noise can be better tolerated if the individual initiates it. Let's take tools in the shop, for example. Well, you go down the shop and you take the electric drill and you drill holes in every material you can imagine. It's going to make a big racket. And if you're turning on the drill, then it's much better tolerated, where you turn it on. And if you have headphones, don't wear them all the time. It's going to make sound sensitivity worse. You can have them with you all the time. Then when you're in some really terrible places like train station, platform, or something like that, then you can put them on. And then the other big thing I work on is jobs, getting into good jobs. We need to start teaching working skills really young. If you're in college right now or in high school, I strongly recommend getting a summer job. So you start learning work skills before you graduate from school. So that makes a slow transition. And here is just one little tip. Let's say they tell you, the boss says, well, this is how you close out a cash register. Write it down in a pilot's checklist. I have a hard time remembering sequence. Little pilot's checklist. Okay, espresso coffee machine in a restaurant. Let me write it down. How to work it. Little pilot's checklist. that can really, really help out. Because I want to see the kids that are different get out into jobs they love. There's one thing that's made my life satisfying is having really interesting work to do, because that gives me friends who shared interests. I have friends in animal behavior, I have friends in the autism community, and when I was in high school and getting bullied, I had friends who riding horses and model rockets. Those are examples of friends who shared interests. And maybe we can just throw it open for questions now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Temple. I think that's going to be a great gateway into a lot of the questions we do have prepared for you.
Okay.
Julian, why don't you go ahead and ask the first question, Julian?
I guess the first question I'm going to ask is, were there any mentors or resources that made a significant impact on your journey?
Yes, yes. Let's start off with my speech teacher, excellent speech teacher. My mother taught me to read when I was 8 by reading out loud with phonics because I didn't know how to read. I had a great third grade teacher. In high school, I had two very important mentors. My science teacher, I was not a motivated student. I was a lousy student, unmotivated, and he gave me interesting projects with optical illusions. And he says, well, if you want to become a scientist, then you're going to have to study. And he motivated me to study. And then Anne out at the ranch, another important mentor. And all of the cattle interest that started in high school. I got exposed to it. Students tend to get interested in stuff they get exposed to. So I had some extremely good mentors when I was in high school and college. Then later on, there was a contractor named Jim, and he seeked me out to design facilities, and he showed me how to start a business. Another very important mentor.
Amazing. So the next question I will ask is, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about autism and how can we combat them?
Well, I like the way what I did is I sold my work. I would show people my drawings. In fact, I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant. And this is one of my drawings right here in my develop different kinds of minds book, which is the young readers edition of visual thinking. And what I learned to do is I learned to sell my work. I put the drawings out on the table. And then I would just talk to somebody that wanted to start a web design business. Well, get some really great websites you've designed on your laptop that you can just show people. I call it the 30-second wow. Sell the work rather than yourself. That's one of the things that I did. And I worked really hard to be really skilled at what I did.
Sorry. How do you think schools can better support neurodivergent students in STEM or creative fields?
Well, I think one of the worst things some schools have done is taken out the shop classes. A lot of schools have taken out hands-on classes. Okay, if a kid's more the pattern thinker, the math thinker, hopefully there's music classes in the schools, theater classes, things where students can get exposed to things that can turn into careers and get skills. That's one of the things that schools can do because students get interested in stuff they get exposed to. And I was just in a high school today, and okay, phones have been a big issue. They do not lock up the phones at Rocky Mountain High School. They were asked politely to put them in their pockets, and they did. And while I was talking for an hour and a half, I didn't see a single phone. They had put them away in their pockets. They found out that they didn't have to like put them in lock boxes or pouches or something like that. But it was made very clear that the phones are not welcome during class, period. Want them in the pockets, out of sight, and they did just fine. That was today.
Nice. I like how you mentioned kind of switching our attention to other types of hobbies and skills, things like theater classes, music classes, STEM classes, and focusing on those sorts of things in schools is a great way to appeal to a wide variety of brain types and people's
Well,
strengths.
that's right. You
And
see,
yeah,
and then you tend to get attracted towards the stuff that you can be good at. And what I found on the whole algebra thing is I worked with people that owned big shops that were definitely autistic. They couldn't do algebra, but they had 20 patents each on mechanical devices. It's all mechanical stuff. When you think about when the patent office first started, all of the inventions were mechanical. Things like grain harvesting equipment, for example. Those are mechanical devices.
Thank you. And so kind of going off of that, how can students leverage their unique strengths? So as you talked about different, thinking styles, how can students harness their unique strengths out of the types that you've mentioned, and of course the infinite variety of strengths people have as neurodivergent people? How can we leverage those things to succeed in our chosen careers? So,
Well, first
Julian
of
wants
all,
to go
one
into
thing,
engineering.
there's
Sorry, go ahead.
a lot of kids that are good at drawing that don't want to draw stuff that a client may want. You see, this is a really important work skill. And when I was in high school, I had a little sign painting business. And my first paid job was for a hair salon. I had to make a sign that a hair salon would want. It would not have horses on it, so I put the Breck shampoo lady on it because I figured that the client would want that. You see, that's something you've got to learn how to use the skill to do stuff that other people would want.
So what role do you think neurodivergent individuals can play in driving innovation?
Well, there would be no computer for us to use tonight if it wasn't for neurodivergent. I have been out to Silicon Valley. I have been to the big tech companies. Half those programmers are on the spectrum, and they would be the mathematical types. I worked with people on mechanical equipment that I know were on the spectrum. There's a lot of technology we would not have if there was no autism. It's that simple.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people in STEM fields do have autism. Yeah.
No, very definitely. And autism's a
Um,
continuum. You're going from Einstein, and then you have somebody with a lot more challenges who maybe can't dress themselves,
yeah.
but they got the same name.
hmm
And you and Julian were mentioning how people's perspectives on neurodiversity and particularly on autism have changed, especially as criteria for autism have changed as well. And going off of that, how do you see the perception of neurodiversity as a social paradigm evolving in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I concentrated more on making myself extremely good at my work. People thought it was weird, but when I put a drawing down in front of them, they went, "Oh, you did that?" You know, I got respect when I showed them that really good drawing. And then I also saw doors to opportunity where I walked up to the editor. If you watch the HBO movie, I walk up to the editor of the magazine. I got his card because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really help my career. I got a reputation that when I covered a cattle meeting, I summarized the talks accurately. And I got respect for that.
So do you kind of see respect for neurodivergent people growing over the years?
Yeah, there's a lot more understanding. There's still a lot of misunderstanding. And of course, I came from the era where I never disclosed anything. I, I would, when it came to checklists, I'd make my own checklist. I said, let me just write down how to work this machine. Let me just make myself a little checklist. And what you could say is pilots need a checklist. I need one too. You could say that.
kind of building on that, has there actually been any career challenges due to your neurodiversity?
Well, I think another thing, I'm going to be writing a chapter for a book on neurodiversity in the workplace. I think you have to decide which battles you're gonna pick. I just talked to a counselor last night. There was a person, autistic, um, got a job in engineering, designing, done some confidentiality. She's going to be vague about what the engineering is, but doing engineering work. And just right off the bat, she started going on about rights for neurodiversity and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of turned off the employer. This is a brand new job. What I would do on a brand new job is really do the engineering really right. They hired you to do the engineering. And then you can get into a situation in a job where you're doing so much activism stuff, it turns off employers. They want you just to turn out the work. And I worked with people that definitely were autistic, and they were very, very good at turning the work out. You almost have to decide what battles you want to fight. And with this particular individual, so I think she has a choice. Does she want to become a full-time advocate or a career in engineering? It's one thing for someone my age, I'm in my late 70s now, to be, a little less career. But she's just starting out, first job as an engineer. And she'd probably be better off to just get really good at engineering. You kind of have to decide what you want to do. The other thing at work, another lady was doing social media for an art museum, and she got into trouble just sticking her nose in too much other stuff in the politics of that company. One thing I learned to do is go in, design my stuff, get out, not nose around that all the other stuff is going wrong on the other part of the plant, just work on my part of it, which was the cattle part. And I had to learn to sort of not stick my nose into everything where it got me into trouble. She would have been just fine if she'd done a great job advertising the museum on social media. That's what she was hired for. Just do a great job with that. I had to kind of learn, okay, I'm a professor now. Do I get involved in all the politics at the university? No, I don't. I come in, I teach my class. I take my book money and my speaking money, and I use it to pay for students to go through school. I have put over 23 graduate students through PhD and master's programs where they've had no debt on those programs. I have 3 professors that I mentored. That are people that are now professors. So I'm going to work hard on that. And if there's something else going on campus that I don't agree with, I'll usually just keep my nose out of it and just make sure I'm there being really good at my class and turning out good research, publishing papers. That's what I'm there for. There's some other stuff. If I think they're doing something stupid, it's something else on campus, I've kind of learned to keep my nose out of it because that's
All
just going to
right.
get me into trouble.
All right. Really insightful. Um, would you um what are your thoughts on like trade school? Like, do you think more people should consider trade school as an option?
Well, I think that the visual thinkers, the object visualizers, the ones like me, should consider trade school because I'm concerned about artificial intelligence just eliminating a whole bunch of jobs in computer programming, video game design, a lot of art stuff, but it's not going to eliminate fixing mechanical things, building mechanical stuff. Um, those jobs are really, really safe. And for some people like me, I'm talking high-end trades here. I'm not talking about laying floor tiles. That's just work. I'm talking about the real high-end stuff where you're inventing equipment and installing complicated things. I'm seeing huge issues with broken elevators and escalators as I travel around because the people that have been fixing those things have retired out. And for certain autistic people, the ones that love tools, trade school would be a good option. For more mathematical type, go the STEM route. What I have found on building something like a food processing plant, and this is the industry I know the most about, my kind of thinker, what might be trade school people, they are inventing and building mechanical equipment. And then the degreed engineer does the boilers and refrigeration. Refrigeration is way too much math. We don't touch that. But in order to have the plant, you need to have both. You need to have both because the mathematicians aren't that good on the mechanical equipment. You see, you need to have both kinds of minds. And both of those different kinds of minds can be autistic. But there's certain, I'm seeing too many kids today growing up, they've never used a tool. I think that's ridiculous. I had a girl in my class who had never used a tape measure or a ruler in her life. I think that's ridiculous. I'm not saying everybody should go to trade school. The ones where that would be one of the good options would be my kind of thinker, the object visualizers. Then your word thinkers, the kind of jobs that they'd be good at is what I call quiet, specialized retail. There's been some real successes selling cars, and they know every feature of every car on the lot, and they help the person get the right car, not the most expensive car, the right car. selling office equipment, selling business insurance, selling financial products. These are all things where autistic verbal type thinkers, the fact and the history lovers, have been very successful. No, the trade school would not be the place for them. But the more mathematical route in engineering is not the place for me because I can't do the higher math. But you want to get into the creative part of welding and building things, not just going out and welding rebar on bridges or something, but getting into the more creative side of it, where you're maintenance in a factory, you're actually inventing equipment. They don't just build it, they invent it. And that's something a lot of people don't realize. I spent 25 years working with these people, every major meat company. Worked with some brilliant minds that just see how machinery works. But I think it's what's important is to expose students to a lot of different things and see what they're good at. And we need to have a lot more emphasis on building up the skill area, the thing they're good at. Pounding away on algebra was kind of useless. So I ended up majoring in psychology. And thank goodness algebra wasn't the main math class when I went to school in '67. So I got through one math class, had to be tutored, had to take statistics, tutored. And a big mistake I see students making today is when they get into trouble in a course, they don't ask for help quickly enough. And I failed my first math quiz. I got tutoring and I got it fast.
Absolutely. So it seems like, and something I've experienced as well as a neurodivergent college student, is understanding, not only our strengths, but understanding things that we have extra challenges with and that we need to seek extra support and help with, because that's just as important as recognizing strengths in order.
Well, no, and there's some prerequisites and stuff. They're putting a lot of algebra and stuff because I think a lot of people think you need algebra for logical thinking. That is not how I think.
Mm-hmm.
I just see how something works. Like the other day, the students, I was up at the University of Guelph and we were talking, one of the students was working on birds when they're migrating, running into glass office buildings with very bad results for the birds. And they talked about tinting the windows. Well, that's so expensive. You can't do that on an existing building. And then one of the students said that the birds would see plants in the windows and then try to land on them with bad results. So I immediately thought, well, migrations in April when the days are longer, why don't we just have the people put pieces of cardboard behind the plants when they go home so that the birds don't see the plants? Maybe that would help. You see, that's an example of seeing a solution to a problem. It's also a very simple solution.
Absolutely. I think it goes to show that we need to value different types of problem solving in our society.
It's a different way of problem solving. You can see something that might be a risk. In my book on visual thinking, I talked about the Fukushima nuclear power plant and why it failed and why it burned up. The engineers did a great job of making it earthquake proof, but they didn't see the tsunami coming in over the seawall and drowning the electrical emergency cooling pump that was in the basement. Simple waterproof doors would have saved it. They didn't see it. That's why you need people like me.
Absolutely. Our society could definitely benefit from more people like you and more people of all different types of.
Well, that's right. And the thing about the autistic person is you tend to have an extreme object visualizer or you have an extreme mathematician.
Absolutely. And I wanted to circle back a little bit to what you were talking about with Julian earlier. Julian asked about some challenges that you might face as a neurodivergent person going about education and working as well. And your piece of advice for that was to choose your battles wisely. I think that is a very valuable piece of advice. And the question I have related to that is, how have you been able to manage feelings of self-doubt and anxiety with managing like your identity as an autistic person and managing your own aspirations, like academically and professionally?
Well, when I was in high school, I had a horrible time with bullying, just horrible. worst part of my life, but I had friends who shared interests, horses and model rockets when I was in high school. Then when I get out of high school, other things. And I've always been very work oriented. I guess that for me, for identity, a college professor, university professor, that comes first, designer of equipment. When you think about last names, a lot of last names are jobs. Baker, carpenter, knight, rider. Those are jobs. And 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 I have to really thank a lot of the mentors I had, because when I was feeling down, I'd call up Ann and we'd have long phone conversations. Jim the contractor, when I got really discouraged on one job, Jim the contractor helped me through it. I really want to thank the really good people that mentored me.
I really love the sentiment of that, and I think I relate a lot as well to the value in a sense of belonging and a sense of community in the midst of, self-doubt and anxiety that, as young people, it's kind of like as we're sorting out our identity, are bound to feel. But I feel like that in some ways is amplified for autistic people, for neurodivergent people. So I appreciate how you mentioned the value of your mentors.
Well, the other problem I'm seeing is I'm seeing parents do everything for their kid. I'm seeing too many kids that aren't learning shopping and bank account and driving. And especially shopping, just going in a store by yourself and buying something. 16 years old, you're fully verbal. You've never gone in a store by yourself and bought something. That's ridiculous. And I have run into that all the time. No, we've got to get them out. They got to learn life skills. And one thing we got to fight is recluses in the room. They just tend to be trouble. And some of that's anxiety. All right, what can we do about the video game addictions? And then the latest research, they are more addictive for autistics. There's been some great successes with replacing video games with auto mechanics. Now, that's something that they can have for a career for the rest of their life. And they found out that cars were a lot more interesting. And what you want to do is gradually introduce the car mechanics, gradually wean them off the games. I'm not saying never play a video game, but 10 hours a day, that's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous. No, we've got to get out and do things with other people. And some of the recluses in the room, they get in a lot of trouble too sometimes.
Kind of related, but kind of. What strategies helped you navigate social settings or group projects in college?
What kind of stuff in college?
Like social settings and group projects.
Well, one thing that helped me, I got bullied some in college, and we had a big college-wide variety show, and I made scenery and I sang a funny song in it. That opened up a lot of doors for me. And I have problems with social events, like a lot of chit chat in a bar or something like that, where it's really noisy, following rapid chit chat conversations. I just can't follow them. And so I'm not going out and doing bar scene. What I tend to do when I go to faculty parties and things like that is I'll talk to one person for 5 minutes and then I'll go talk to somebody else. And I've learned not to talk their head off for 30 minutes of something I'm super interested in, and I bore them by just going on and on and on about it forever.
Oh, as a kid, I also kind of had a problem with monologuing a lot. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And you have to, well, I kind of made rules. There's been a problem in college with an autistic student wanting to carry on a conversation with the professor during the class, and I had a rule: 2 questions per class period. I made some rules like that. And that sometimes helped. But where I had the best relationships is when we were working on projects together. Okay, what field are you in, Julian?
Well, I'm gonna study engineering next year
Engineering,
in
okay.
college.
And okay, so you're in high school right now.
Yes.
How old are you?
I'm 17. I'm gonna turn 18 in April.
All right, you can get a summer job on a construction site. Might be the best thing you ever did. You have to be 18 for that job.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. What's your work experience so far?
I've had a couple of internships.
Okay, that's good because one of the big problems I'm seeing with college students is not getting enough work skills. And one thing,
Yeah.
to get into college, you need to jump on the opportunity to do engineering internships, go on field trips, get involved with projects that different professors are doing. That's something you need to do when you're in college. So you try a lot of different stuff in engineering and find out what you like. Find out what you're good at.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's very important to like get internships and get that work experience. For sure gain that job experience. Like I read earlier of how like employers were saying to put your retail experience on your resume because it like proves like a lot of like important like soft skills.
Well, that's right. No, that's right. Because on my very first job, I criticized some welding and I said, well, like pigeon do. And the plant engineer pulled me into his office and he didn't scream at me, but he was a very good job coach. He told me exactly what to do. He said, Whitey, the welder's in the cafeteria now, and you're going to have to go up there right now and apologize for that kind of rude talk. He told me exactly what to do. He was very direct about it and very, very calm.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point too, Julian, because I know I can relate to, kind of having the perception that, oh, maybe these job experiences matter a little bit less, so I should just highlight, these ones that seem more legitimate or prestigious on my resume. But I have found that actually, I think some of my first jobs, the jobs I've had in high school or, over the summers and stuff, have been some of my most valuable and transformative like work experiences for me, like personally. And I feel like that's something that is pretty universal for the most part. And I think definitely were very confidence boosting to me for me as like someone with ADHD as well. I learned a lot from my role. Like I worked at grocery stores and like as a barista and all of this stuff over the years. And I feel like I agree with Julian, and I'm glad you brought up that concept. And I'm glad that you, Dr. Grandin, bring up the importance of working on these soft skills and other things that you may not perceive initially as being related to your career outcomes, but they really do feed into it because you learn
Oh, I
these.
agree with that. I agree with
Yeah.
that. Doing some waitressing or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really good on the job training. And
Absolutely.
learning how to talk to lots of different people. One thing that helped me
Mm-hmm.
was when I was a kid selling candy for charity. The other thing in our neighborhood, when the kids were like 8 years old, they had to dress up in their good clothes. And when the parents had parties, you had to greet the guests, take their coats, talk to them. That taught social skills.
Mm-hmm.
No, but just getting out and just having. Now, the one thing I would do is avoid the super rapid multitasking jobs, like super crazy busy takeout window. Probably should be avoided. You just don't have the processor speed for that. But then other jobs, in fact, what one McDonald's, what the manager did was when the store got really busy, they took the autistic lady off the cash register and had her clean tables when the store got super busy.
So kind of balancing different sensory profiles and needs to
Yeah,
allow someone
that's
to
right.
succeed in the job. That makes sense. I appreciate your perspective on how balancing early on job experiences is important to consider alongside, understanding one's own profile and
Yeah.
knowing like, is that environment going to be too overstimulating for me? Is this, environment going to be too
Well,
understimulating for
that's
me?
right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Just going through some of this neurodivergent, I'm looking at some of the chat stuff here. Well, play and driving innovation. I think neurodivergence drives innovation, if you want my opinion. I mean, Einstein had no speech until age 3. He would land in an autism program for little kids today.
The next question I want to ask is how you found a passion for psychology, because as an animal behavior researcher, you mentioned that you eventually decided to focus on psychology in college after you know having some deliberation about different fields you were interested in.
Well, I
How
got
did
very
you land upon it, and use your strengths to succeed in it?
I got very fascinated with optical illusions. If you watch the HBO movie Temple Grandin, they showed they get a movie about the Ames distorted room, and I got fascinated by that. Also, in my high school, we had a very good psychology course, experimental psychology course, where I got introduced to some of that stuff, and it was really interesting. Another thing is I had to avoid higher math. And for psychology, I just had to take the intro math class and statistics. So that's another reason why I went into that. I had to drop an engineering course. I just couldn't uh, do the abstract math. And then when I got into college, I was lucky that there was a wonderful animal behavior class. I was really lucky that my school had that. And that further got my interest going.
So another question I have is what keeps you motivated during difficult times?
Well, this is when I would talk to some of the mentors when I really got down. And that helped to keep me motivated when times got very, very difficult. I have to really thank people like Carlock, Mr. Carlock, Ann out at the ranch, Jim the contractor when I was starting my designing. These were people that were very, very helpful when I got down.
Then, Allie, if you want to ask one more question, and then we have some great questions from our audience here that we'll get into.
Okay, all righty.
Last question here, Allie. So go ahead, Allie.
Yeah, so kind of just tying in what we've been discussing with the overall goals of the Neurodiversity Alliance, and all of the chapters that Neurodiversity Alliance has across the nation in high schools and colleges. From your perspective, as someone who has navigated high school and college, and as both a student and a professor who is autistic, how can neurodivergent students and their allies help create more inclusive spaces in schools?
All right,
in
let's just talk
particular?
about some of the problems with the environment. For about 10 or 20% of the neurodivergent population, they can see flicker on LED lights. People have migraine scenes. I don't have this problem, but some people do, and it's like a strobe light. And the way you can tell if a classroom's got this problem is take pictures with your phone in slow motion video. This would be one of the most important things to fix in the architecture to make a classroom more inclusive. The other thing is avoiding long strings of verbal information, putting information in checklist formats. Those are two very, very simple things. And some people need a little extra time on tests. Those are some of the most common things that you often need. And then, of course, getting bullying under control would be another one. Now, what are some of the questions from the audience?
Yeah, so we got plenty of great questions. I'm just gonna go in order here from when we had our attendees ask them. So the first question we have from our audience is, what drew your interest to animals?
Exposure. That all started in high school. My high school had a small dairy, and I learned how to milk cows. And then when I went out to my aunt's ranch, that's where I got introduced to beef cattle. This gets down to exposure. And my high school had horses. You see, students have to be exposed to things to get interested. Cattle were not something I was really exposed to as a young kid, but it was something that in my teenage years, I got exposed to horses and cattle, and that's how the interest got started. And I mean, horses were one of the things that just saved my life because my school put me to work running a horse barn, cleaning 9 stalls every day. I was in charge of that. I basically ran the school's horse barn. So that gave me a responsibility. And then I had friends who riding horses and getting horses ready for show. So all the animal stuff started in my teenage years. And I was exposed to it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Our next question might encompass some of the themes you were chatting about earlier, but how do you deal with bullying with neurodivergent differences? And the individual who asked the question also says, they've read your books and they're their favorite books, and they always make the person feel better and understood. So I guess how would you deal with bullying with individuals with neurodivergent differences, or maybe any other
Well,
tips?
let's just talk about bullying.
Okay, yeah.
Fortunately for me, horses were a refuge away from the bullies. In fact, I have a paper you might want to look at it. It's called How Horses Help the Teenager with Autism Make Friends and Learn How to Work. And fortunately, the bullies did not participate in horse activities. So there were places where I could get away from this. Now, there's some neurodivergent kids have done really well in band. That's worked really well in some cases, but in one case, the bullies were in the band, and then that did not work. We've got to get involved with friends who shared interests somewhere away from the bullies. Now, there's some situations. I just talked to a parent this morning on another Zoom call, and they were really saying nasty stuff to her daughter. I think it was 15 years old. It was getting to the point where she probably needs to be taken out of that school. They said, well, can I homeschool her? And I said, yeah, she's smart, but she's 15 years old. She needs to get a job. I've got to get her out of the house. We can't have recluses in the bedroom. We've just got to not have that. And get her out doing things, get her a job, and finish up. She could probably do the school on nights and weekends because she's super smart. And sometimes you just have to get away from the bullies. You know, if it's younger kids, a lot of times they have homeschool groups. But I don't want to see these kids get too isolated. That's something I do not want to see. There's too many bad rabbit holes to go down on the internet that are very bad. I don't think I need to discuss them. You know what they are. They're and that kind of stuff tends to happen when they get too isolated.
Our next question here is, what role do you think government, I mean federal, state, local, and or school district levels, should play in supporting neurodivergent staff and faculty?
Well, I found my animal welfare work were the places where I got the most good stuff done as I worked for big clients like McDonald's. And when we started inspecting meatpacking plants, boy, did things change. Those plants fixed their stuff because they didn't want to lose a big customer. I think some of the best things are going to end up being local. I travel all around. I've seen some super good local stuff, you know, that a town might be doing with a school, or start a therapeutic riding program, or start some other really good thing. And that's where I've seen some of the best stuff. And some of the best teachers for the neurodivergent are, I had teachers that, some teachers I'm almost positive were autistic. Mr. Carlock was not. But there was other people I worked with professionally that definitely were on the autism spectrum. But you see, verbal thinking tends to be very top down, big, broad concepts. Okay, we had things like ADA, the American with Disabilities Act. That was great legislation that helped make a lot of improvements. But the other thing I don't like is we talk about disabilities in like a broad umbrella, and somebody in a wheelchair has very different needs than someone like me. They've been, you know, there's a good chance they won't need extra time on tests, especially if they're in a wheelchair from an accident. You see, I tend to look at it specifically. The basic principles, like the stuff with the lighting and the checklists and the extra time on tests, that's come up over and over and over and over and over again. Those are simple accommodations that we need to be doing. And we need to teach the student how to make their own checklists too.
Absolutely. And I think very much related to what you were just speaking of, what are your thoughts on current ASD diagnostic practices?
Well, autism diagnosis is not precise. It's not like a diagnosis for tuberculosis. Now, we've got a lot of problems in certain parts of the country where you have a 3-year-old with no speech and they're on a 3-year wait list for diagnosis. They're not getting any services. And we know very well that it's very important to get little 2-year-olds that are not talking instantly into services. So what do? Well, we're going to have to get some grandmothers in the neighborhood and some retired teachers and stuff. And we got to start working with this kid. We're going to have to. We'll call it library play for legal reasons. I'm, you know, going to have to get the churches and stuff involved, because the worst thing that you can do with an autistic 3-year-old that's not talking is to just let them sit in the corner. No, we've got to work on working with them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And our next question we have is, do you see value in young adults and older adults being evaluated as being autistic? Many kids didn't have the ability to be evaluated early. Do you think it is worthwhile?
For some individuals, it is. I've got a book called Different, Not Less, where 18 people tell their stories diagnosed later in life. And I think where it helps is on relationships. For a lot of people, it's a relief, like a big relief on the relationship front. Now, the more fully verbal cases, in some cases, I think the labels hold them back on the job front. But on the relationships, that's where it's been helpful. I've talked to a bunch of people, maybe 20s, 30s, get diagnosed, and they said, what a relief. Now I know why I had problems with relationships.
Oh. And then our next question, again related to universities, is do you feel like attending a smaller university versus a large/Ivy League school for graduate school or PhD program is better for a neurodivergent person?
Well, once you get to graduate school, the classes are small. Where I think a smaller school is good is for those beginner classes. And I went to a small college where maybe there was 18, maybe 18 students in a class, small classes, and I didn't realize how important that was until I went to do my master's in the early 70s, and I was signing up for my courses, and I watched 500 freshmen line up for an English class, a 500 student English class, and I was so glad I wasn't in that. I think for a lot of students that think differently, maybe do the first 2 years at community college. Now, once you get past those first 2 years, even in a big university, the class sizes get reasonable. But those huge beginner classes, that for a lot of students, that's going to be very, very difficult. Because when I failed my first math quiz in a small college, I went right to the professor, and he tutored me in his office. That wouldn't have happened in a 500 student class. So especially those early years, avoiding these gigantic introductory classes probably be a good idea. And then, but later on, this junior and senior classes are reasonable size. The graduate student classes are usually reasonable in size. That's not where you have the huge classes. And the other thing is I went to a little startup college, and I got a very good education there. And then I went to Arizona State for animal science. They don't even have an animal science department anymore. So it wouldn't be a top school now for animal science. So, got a decent education there. Don't get too bent out of shape if you don't get into your dream school. You're still going to get a decent education. My little startup college had a retired Harvard professor that taught animal behavior. I was very lucky I had him. Came in 2 afternoons a week just to teach that class. I was really lucky I had that class.
I guess, yeah, related to that, how did you decide to get your PhD and what helped you achieve that?
Well, I was out working designing equipment. I got my master's in 75, was out doing freelance designing corrals, and then I always was interested in neuroscience. And we had a recession, and I kind of had it figured out. There'd be 2 years where there'd be very little consulting jobs, very little construction, and I could get the classes done. And that's exactly what happened. And I got the classes done, and it was in 1981, right around there. It was a recession. And then it took me forever to get the thesis done because I was out working on building equipment again.
Thank you. And our next question here is talking about just the linguistic debate of whether to call someone a person with autism or an autistic person. For example, my brother prefers to be called an autistic person because he sees his autism as an advantage. He feels that the language of an autistic person more closely describes his identity. What do you prefer and why?
Well, my very first book was called Emergence Labeled Autistic. Then I had another book called The Autistic Brain. It's right here. And then these books were published before people really got thinking about person first or identity first language. And so I'm tending to use autistic. Very first book's titled Emergence Labeled Autistic. I'm, that's what I'm tending to use now.
Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I definitely need to catch up on all the books you've written for us so far. I guess related to that, and thinking about the mentors you've had and individuals that have helped you out in the past, How did you seek out or find these mentors?
Well, my science teacher was at my special school that I was at, and Mr. Patey suggested that he work with me. And then Anne, I went out and visited the ranch, and she took an interest in me. You know, sometimes mentors will find a kid too. You never know where you might find them.
Mhm.
And Jim was just starting his steel and concrete business. He was a former Marine Corps captain, for no nonsense, practical, and he seeked me out. And for 10 years, we built jobs together.
Thank you. I think it's time for about two more questions here, and then we'll have some closing statements by our student leaders here.
Okay.
So, what are your thoughts on individuals striving to become role models within narrowly defined, diverse communities? And this individual says, personally, I've never had figures like that growing up and wasn't even aware that others experienced challenges similar to mine.
Well, I think it's always good to find out that other people have some of the same problems, that you're not alone. I think that's important to, to find that out. And the other thing is I had a lot of problems with anxiety. I addressed that issue in thinking in pictures, and I do take antidepressant medication. I had crippling anxiety all through high school and through my 20s, colitis that wouldn't stop. It was ripping me apart with colitis. That's why I was eating yogurt and jello. And I went on a very low dose of an antidepressant drug, and it greatly, greatly reduced the anxiety. And the mistake that's often made with antidepressants is too high a dose. I don't think I'd even be alive today if I hadn't gone on that medication because my health was such a mess. Now, I would just recommend reading the chapter, especially in here, where I would talk about the medication, and then you make your own decisions. But it helped me a tremendous amount. Another thing is I exercise every day. That's also really important to do. I do 100 old lady push-ups, and then I lay on the floor and I swim on the floor. And this is something I can do in a hotel room. But the exercise is really important. And when I first started doing the swimming laying on the floor, because I had to have easy hotel exercises, I could barely get my legs off the ground. It took me 3 months to work up to that. These are also things that help me. And then there's other people, they don't need medication. You can use exercise, mindfulness training, relaxation training. I had my squeeze machine that helped relax me. Some people don't need medication, but my nervous system was the fear circuits were turned on overdrive. It was like a racing engine. And when I took the medication, it was like adjusting the idle screw on an old-fashioned carburetor, and the engine was no longer racing.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. I think there's some absolutely wonderful tips there for sure. And then lastly, before again we have Julian and Natalie sort of close us out here, one of our attendees wants to know if you are working on any new books, or are you gonna take a break after your most recent book? And they also wanted to say that they loved visual thinking as well.
Well, good. I'm glad they liked that. And I also aimed that book at business leaders, that we need these skills. Now, I just updated my textbook on livestock handling and transport that was published about a week ago. And I'm also working on updating another textbook on animal welfare. They're books I've had before, and I'm, just updating them. So I'm still always working on that stuff. And visual thinking, that was the big COVID project. And I really got deep into the research on the different kinds of thinking really exist. They're real. And in fact, there's some new research that was just published in the journal Nature that showed that in people, language is not required for thought, for either mathematical thought or visual thought.
I really like that one.
And that's not in visual thinking. That just came out just a few months ago. It was 2024. Did visual thinking in 2022.
Excellent. Well, yeah, Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for sharing your incredibly valuable insight for our attendees and our student leaders here. And I just want to open it up to both Julian and Allie both. If there's anything else you would like to say before we all leave for the evening?
I just want to wish all of you a very wonderful evening, And I'm so glad that you could join us, Temple Grandin. And I
Yeah.
really enjoyed your insights and takes on life, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I just
Same
hope
here.
it gave you some ideas. And
Absolutely. You definitely did tonight, and it was such a privilege to be able to talk with you. And you've given so many of us so many ideas through your speeches and your books as well. And it was very, very amazing and something we've been excited about for a long time to be able to speak with you tonight. So thank you so much, Dr. Grandin, and thank you each of you for being here as well. And we hope we can use some of your ideas to create positive changes in schools and workplaces and in the world as a whole. So
I think we're going
thank
to end
you.
up doing a lot more local things. I was just talking to
I
some
think
high
so
school
too.
students about sustainability, and
Mm,
food waste is a horrible issue. We waste so much food. And
mhm.
that's something the high school student could work on in the local community. Pick out something where you could drastically reduce food waste. That's something you can do in the community.
Absolutely. Starting small and focusing on, the things that we can address where we can. I think that's a great model to look up to, as leaders and as people who want to make a difference.
Well, that's just right. And the other thing I did on my cattle stuff is I wrote about it. There's a lot of people doing some really great cattle stuff, but nobody knows about it. But I'd write
Mhm.
about it in the cattle magazines. I'd write about it in the academic journals. I have a lot of books I've written.
Absolutely.
And what I've tried to
There's
do is just give a lot of practical advice that people can use.
right. And there's value in being able to disseminate that information through writing and through speaking and getting
That's
to
right.
share your story. So thank
Yeah,
you.
that's what I'm doing.
Great. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Grandin. This, like I said, has been incredibly insightful. I'm really privileged to have you here and be a voice for thousands of people countrywide, and of course for our audience here and our students here as well. And for those of you in attendance currently, I would absolutely love to hear feedback at the end. You'll be hearing from me after this webinar has completed, and we'd love to have you join us and be a part of our networking community. And if, Dr. Grant, if there's any other parting wisdom you want to,
No, I just want to see people get out there and get into good careers. And this is I've been doing a lot of talks to students, encourage students, get out when you're in college, when you're in high school, get out and try lots of different things because it's important to find out what you like, but you might try something and say, I just hated that. It's also important to find that out. The other thing we've noticed is, of course, in the animal field, a lot of students want to be a veterinarian because that's the only career they know about. But when about 70%, like at our department and at many other departments, about 70% want to be veterinarians. And then by the time they get to be a junior, they discover all these other interesting careers you can do in the animal field that they didn't even know about. So yeah, there's still a lot of them become veterinarians, maybe 20% instead of 70%, because they got a chance to get out and try a bunch of stuff.
yeah. So, I really like that takeaway. Just get out, try new things, even if it's something you're super interested in. There could be other career paths, aligned with that interest as well. So, again, thank you very much.
Get out and do things. And thank you so much for having me. It's been just great to be here tonight.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and I hope
Well,
everyone has
thank you.
a good
And I'm
evening.
going to sign off now.
All right.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Take
Goodbye.
care.
Yep.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Okay. Goodbye.